Hello, today's video will be about this brand new Inspiron 16 Plus Dell laptop computer. I think it's a very interesting model. It has got quite a good configuration. Of course, it's meant more for the creative types and for business rather than home use in a sense. However, it's definitely not a precision workstation or any other type of laptop you may see and may think about for that reason. So let me run you through some of the specifications so that you understand better what this laptop is about. But first, I'm going to mention the price, and I'm going to mention it again because I think it's highly important. In the configuration that you see with this laptop over here, it is around 1,600 euros. So it's a laptop that is in the upper tier of the product lineup. And we will see how well it handles various tasks, because I'm also going to run some benchmarks. But first of all, let me mention something about the laptop's construction, the laptop's build, and what I think about its features. The chassis is standard. I don't see anything that could be out of ordinary for a modern laptop these days. You have the vents on this side of the laptop, which means that it will probably not interfere as much when you take into account cooling. However, as you will see probably, it may get quite noisy, and we will see, but this is standard for laptops that have an integrated graphics card as well as a dedicated one. More on that later. Another vent, an SD card slot, which is very good because it's not a given that modern laptops have an SD card slot. Most of them either have a micro SD card slot, or simply, as in the case of laptops made by Apple, they simply omit any sort of card reader, which is bad for someone that edits photos or uses this kind of support for videos. You have your standard USB port, which is always nice because there are still a lot of devices that are compatible with or that can be used with the standard connector. An headphone and microphone combined jack, which is standard, but I think some laptops may start to omit this in the future. On the front side, we have nothing, which is to be expected. Okay, let's move on. On the right side, as you can probably guess, right, I hope this one is better, we have the USB-C port that is also a Thunderbolt port, as you can notice, the battery indicator, another USB port, and an HDMI port. I think some of you already may spot something odd, and more on that later. Another vent, probably part of the intake and exhaust, just as well as all the entire lower part of the laptop that has the vents over here, because the laptop is going to take the air from below and then probably blow it outside in the front and to the sides. And on the lower part of the laptop, as you can see, nothing special. There are just labels. In order to access the inside of the laptop, you have to take out the cover, and there are no service ports, which is probably a given. All right, and what was missing and what I was alluding to? Well, if you're going to look closely, you're going to notice that there is not at all a possibility to connect an Ethernet cable. And I think this is a major omission, because there are some Dell laptops, even in lower tiers, that still have an Ethernet port. Of course, they don't use probably the best way to connect it, since it's a latch that has to be placed lower in order to accommodate the entire width of the cable of the connector. However, in this case, it's totally omitting. So if you want to use a standard wired network, you must buy an adapter, which is not that great, and I think it's still a major omission when space actually affords at least a reasonable compromise. What I can say about the build quality? Well, in a general sense, I think it's quite alright. I don't have that many complaints. Although it's a plastic case, it seems to have quite a good rigidity to it. It's quite stiff, which hopefully should make it survive some faults or at least a bit of abuse. I have not mentioned the power supply port. It's the standard barrel that is used in other Dell laptops. However, you may have noticed that there is no possibility on powering the laptop through USB, which I think it's sometimes a minor nuisance. Of course, an USB adapter should be able to deliver a lot of power, and this may mean separate circuitry inside the laptop. And of course, it may not supply the entire power the laptop may require, so it would not operate at full power. However, I think that the omission of such a feature is still sometimes a problem, because you certainly not going to have the ability to run such a laptop at high enough performance through an USB adapter. That's a given. However, sometimes you may trickle charge it, meaning at least some of the power that may be required by the laptop could be supplied through an external device. So there are still some aspects that I think may be optimized in the design. And as I mentioned, the power adapter, let's look at it. It's an 140 watts typical adapter. It's quite a beefy build. It's type of design that I have seen in many laptops, and it's quite alright. I think it's well suited for the job, and I have no complaints about it. It can also accommodate your typical 3-prong cable, so there is no issue with that. In use, it gets slightly warm, and that is to be expected, probably if you're going to use the laptop in longer sessions, and particularly when gaming or running heavy applications. It's going to be much warmer, probably slightly hotter. However, the design is good, and the same power adapter I have seen in the past, and it was quite reliable. So I'm not expecting major issues with it. All right, let's get back to the laptop and see what kind of configuration we have in front of us. Of course, I'm also going to power the laptop because I want to show you how it works. Okay. As you notice, the laptop powered by itself. I don't know if there is an option to make the laptop not start when the chassis is being opened, but this is not an important issue. Okay, I'm going to... Good. I think now it's operating properly. First of all, you may be wondering what kind of configuration we have here. Well, let me show you the basics, because this is the easiest way for me to do. The Core i7 14700H. It's quite a powerful processor. It's a 14-core processor. Of course, it's not a top-of-the-line offering. However, I think it works quite well for this purpose, and you're not going to have that many complaints on a laptop that clearly is not marketed as a high-end solution, but more of an intermediate level between a workstation and a home computer that can be used for your typical office tasks. Of course, it has an integrated GeForce RTX video card, and let me see. It's a 4050 GeForce RTX card. It's not a top-of-the-line offering, but clearly it's more than enough for these chassis, and I don't think there will be many complaints on its abilities. And it's clearly much better than the integrated Intel Iris Xe graphics. Just as with any laptop in this segment, you can choose to run either the integrated graphics or the dedicated graphics depending on your performance expectations. It's obvious that the integrated graphics card is going to require less power, but if you need more, and actually why would you buy a laptop with a dedicated graphic cards if you would not use it, then you can also switch, or you can switch by default to the NVIDIA GeForce RTX graphic card. All in all, I think it's quite a good combination. The laptop as supplied is with 16 gigabytes of memory. I think it could have 32 gigabytes or even 64. I will check and probably mention in the details on the video. But for general purpose, I think that 16 gigabytes is enough. In terms of Wi-Fi, it has an 802.11ax wireless solution. I think it has quite a good performance. It's your typical Intel wireless card. It's not perhaps the top-end model, but I think it will handle quite well the tasks. No complaints over here. And the SSD as supplied, it's Kioxia 512 gigabytes NVMe. It's nothing spectacular. It's just the basic configuration you can probably get in this price tag, because I consider it not to be essential to have higher specifications, but others may find that SSDs in a range of 1 to 2 terabytes may be added, and of course with much better performance. In this case, it was enough for sorry, for these goals I had in mind. All right, let me show you what the software configuration is. It's your typical Windows 11 installation. For your pleasure, I left also the software that is being supplied by Dell, and of course it's a new instance. It's not the only laptop manufacturer that is going to have a large bundle of useless software. This is typical in this market, although I still think it's quite annoying when you are going to buy products that are quite expensive, and at least you should have the option of not having all this bundle, which is entirely unneeded. So you have My Dell install, you have Support Assist, and a plethora of other applications. I can tell you that, and I can even show you in a control panel if you like. So just for the fun of it, let me show you what kind of applications are installed. And if you see quite closely, Dell Digital Delivery Services, Dell Optimizer, Dell Pair, Dell Support Assist, Dell Support Assist, Support Assist, Dell Update, Dell Update. What is the purpose of the entire software? I don't know. Some users, and particularly ones that are on the business tier, do not need at all any of these applications. However, they are included and probably they have to be deleted. I'm not going to show you the removal process to going through uninstall on all of this, because I don't want to bother with you with that, but actually this is how things are handled. Another very important element, and probably one that I should have started with, what kind of display we have in front of us. It's an LCD that has a 2.56 or 2.5K resolution, so it's a bit higher than the standard HD offering. It's in a 16 by 10 format, so I can try and show you probably more of it. That will probably help. It's unfortunately your typical LCD. You're not going to find that many things to be enthused about. It's the same basic look that you're going to see on so many laptops. It's not going to excel in terms of color reproduction, contrast, or anything like that. The maximum resolution is the maximum brightness is quite high, as you can see. So probably we can use it in an outside environment. I'm just going to lower it because it's too much for the current camera setup. And I think this one is going to be an acceptable compromise. I can show you, and probably the camera is going to pick quite well what are the limitations of this display. So just a minute, I have to reduce the brightness slightly. Yes, this one is going to be better. What you see on the camera is most of what I see on the screen, so this is good to know. In general, you're going to notice that colors are not that vivid, and of course blacks are not that dark. And you also notice one of the issues I noticed with this laptop and with this laptop design. As you have seen, the brightness has slightly dipped and then get back to normal. I think this is a bug in the way in which the firmware or something in the drivers is going to adjust the brightness. I have seen it for a couple of times, so it's clearly not a small hitch that happens every now and then. I cannot say precisely how frequently it happens, but you're going to see this. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to happen only at lower ambient brightness, but it's a thing to take into consideration that it's not that well managed. There is also a mention about low blue light radiation. That may have been important in the past, but today just about any display has some sort of reduction in the amount of UV light or near UV light it's going to emit. Looking at elements, we can clearly see that the contrast is what you can typically expect, and nothing about it is special. So if you're going to do graphics works, then probably you're going to be slightly disappointed with this display, or at least if you're not going to do tasks that are overly critical, you're going to fare just fine. However, keep in mind, it's not a display that conforms to your DCI P3 specification or any sort of high color profile standard. It has a 120 Hz refresh rate, so that is going to be quite fine, but other than that, it's your typical LCD. You shouldn't have that many expectations on it, and unfortunately, it's not going to live up to anything better than that. So, having said that, let's look upon some applications and see how the laptop handles them. I think the most important one is going to be your typical benchmark. As you noticed, again, it cycled the brightness, and I don't know exactly what the reason may be. As you can see over here, or probably if you can't see, then I will mention to you, it's a 45 watt CPU, so it's not going to be a package that is releasing a lot of heat in this standard, but again, there is nothing special about it. Processors in this power rating have been available on laptops for quite a while, and this has been the tendency. Instead of using 65 watts or higher rated higher power rated processor, again you have noticed that sudden dip. I'm quite sure that it can be disabled, and probably we will try to see that. Brightness, adjust the brightness, let's see. Change brightness based on content. No, it's not. Night light. And in advanced display, you cannot do that. I'm pretty sure there is an option to change brightness based on content off, but this is not going to have any sort of influence, because right now we are not on battery, and obviously it's not about the content. Let's move forward and see what else we can find. So we are not going to be bothered too much about this changing brightness. Okay, these are the details that may be of interest, but I'm not going to comment upon them. They are not essential for the current situation. Okay, and you have the graphics card that is supplied, the dedicated graphics card, and the integrated one, which, as expected, doesn't show too many details. All right, I think this is the first part that we wanted to see. Let's go and look at our performance test, because the Passmark software has been used in my evaluations for quite a while, and it's a very good basis for evaluation or tests that are quite extensive on the processor and the graphics card. So I will comment as the benchmark is running. Okay, just wait a while for it to gather the necessary data, because otherwise the software is not going to be able to run properly. All right. As you notice, Program Compatibility Assistant, I think this one may be related to the performance test program. Probably there needs to be an update that avoids this kind of issues, but is not going to have any sort of influence on our test, because DirectIO, I think, is a driver that is being used in order to assess the configuration. So I'm not expecting any sort of problems. Would you like to automatically correct this? Yes, but this is not going to have any sort of influence. Okay, and we can see again that error popping up. So let's run the benchmark with all the tests and see where we are headed. I'm expecting quite a high performance for the processor, probably over 50,000 to 17,000 points. I'm expecting mid-range graphics performance, because again, this is not the highest spec laptop. Quite a decent SSD benchmark, because it's not the fastest, but it's also not the worst configuration you may have. And quite a good show for memory, because it's quite a new platform. As you can clearly notice, the cooling starts to be noticeable, the cooling fans. To some of you, it may be slightly annoying to hear the cooling fans. I'm not going to comment too much upon that, because it depends how much performance your laptop offers, of course, barring the case when it makes so much noise that you may think you are on a runway with an airplane that is quite close to you, but I think that is not the case here, and neither is going to be in most situations. Okay, 40,000 points. It's a good performance, clearly above my estimation, but I have to say that I haven't looked too much before, so it was just my best guess that it could be probably close to 20,000, but it wasn't. It was more than that. In all of these applications, the performance is quite good. I wasn't expecting anything to be bad, because again, we are having a solid graphics card configuration. I'm noticing here some dips, and I'm not entirely sure if they are due to the way in which the benchmark runs, the screen refresh rate, or a combination of those two. I'm noticing again that same pattern of some dips that may be very hard to understand, and performance that jumps from around 40, 50 frames per second to 120. I don't know why those jumps. Okay. And the same issue manifests here. I'm not quite confident that it's due to the error that is being placed. Also keep in mind that there are some situations where the frame rate suddenly jumps over 120 and at other times it is seriously below. I'm not entirely sure what happens over here. We see around 200 to 140 frames per second in this test. It was quite a good test with older generation graphics card, but it's that the newer models do not have any sort of issue with showing a good performance here. Around 400 frames per second. This again was a test that showed some issues with older graphics cards, but we are talking about graphics cards that were released almost 5 years in the past, so you don't have to take that as having any sort of meaning today. Right, I think it's ran at around 300 frames per second, that was the average. Quite a good performance over here as well. Over 100 frames per second is a very good result. Of course, it doesn't run in the native resolution, but that is the condition that was set by the benchmark. The GPU compute test also shows a very good performance, around 800 something frames per second. I think it's quite alright. Again, a solid performance over here, but in general, with just about any newer graphics card, you're going to fare at least decently. Even the Iris Xe graphics fares at, I think, around 200 or 300 frames per second over here, or slightly more. Again, nothing spectacular in this test. I'm expecting very good performance. Unfortunately, this test is going to still take some time, and I don't have that much to comment until that point. But I will mention some other aspects. I think, as I have used the laptop for a couple of days, the keyboard feels very nice. It's probably one of the nicest keyboards in the sense of the tactile feel you get. The layout is similar to typical laptops. There is nothing to complain over here. The keyboard is also backlit, and I think it has a couple of brightness levels. Okay. It's 2 brightness levels, which is quite typical with laptops of this type. There is also a fingerprint sensitive button. I have not used this feature and I never use it, but it's good to know that it's available. The speaker configuration mentions the presence of 4, but I'm not entirely sure where they are placed. Even if you are going to think of that as showing a spectacular potential, keep in mind that it's still a laptop, so the audio quality is never going to be as good as on a dedicated system. It's going to be fine for typical entertainment purposes, but only in confined spaces. I have not mentioned much about the camera because it's your typical full HD camera. It doesn't have a particular performance to write home about. It's not having a high resolution, and I'm expecting it to be quite average, to say the least. We will see, however, how the camera output looks. All right, we are at the end of the benchmark. The performance was slightly lower than expected on the graphics marks test. I don't know exactly what were the major reasons for those performance dips. The 3D graphics test clearly showed a very good performance. I was expecting perhaps a bit higher memory score, but that is the case. Alright, I think that we have seen enough of this test. I'm not going to upload it. These are the split results, so you can see quite clearly where it fared better and where it fared worse. Okay, to the mark in the simple vectors test, I think it was the worst performance, 63% out of all computers that have been benchmarked is quite a poor performance. This one is even worse in Windows interface. That is quite interesting because I think most graphics cards today are not that optimized for handling the typical graphics that is being required by Windows, and the driver stack has been that much improved in order to make graphics operate better. I think this is an issue since Windows 7 more or less, or Windows Vista to be more precise, because that was when the graphics stack had the most important change. But it still goes on to show that there is a lot of performance left on the table. It may be due to the drivers, it may be due to something else, but clearly the performance is not the best, and you have clearly seen some examples of those issues. If you're going with the graphics performance, I don't think it's that meaningful to look at performance, because ultimately what matters a lot over here, unfortunately I pressed rerun, what matters a lot over here is not the performance, but the variability. And unfortunately, you're not going to see that variability. How much the performance jumped, how much it had some dips in certain places. And I think this one might have been more important, but it's not on the 2D mark, it's on the 3D mark, sorry. Right, you already see some issues on DirectX 9, and I'm not expecting the performance for such an older graphics interface to improve that much, but it's going to show exactly what you're going to see. Switching to the integrated graphics card, I don't think is going to offer that much performance, because the integrated graphics card is not optimized for older titles as well, so you can see clearly what kind of performance to expect. DirectX 10, yes, it's still quite popular. You're going to probably reach a good performance. DirectX 11, yes, again, very good one. And DirectX 12, which should be the main focus for this kind of laptop, is close to expectations. So overall, I think that it shows quite well what you can do with this laptop. It's clearly not for vintage gaming or running older applications. And I think that this just about sums it up, because at memory mark, I'm not going to be able to show you that many things that are meaningful. Probably I will comment on some database operation. Database operation probably means queries, but I'm not entirely sure what they are going to do that. Memory, yes, memory reads and memory writes probably are not that great. Oh, and this one is very interesting. Available RAM, it doesn't matter. Because actually you're not going to expect such a laptop to have probably 16 gigabytes of memory. Is going to typically be spec at 32 gigabytes, so I'm not going to be bothered too much about the amount of memory that is available. Okay, memory reads, memory writes. Yeah, so probably memory reads and latency. Very interesting. I'm expecting latency to be much better than that, but probably there is an issue since the memory configuration is not optimal. Probably with other memory modules, it could have been much better. But considering a stock configuration, so I'm not going to say too much about it. All right, let's run the next benchmark I had in mind, just for the sake of it, but of course you're not going to see much to write home about. Just about now you have seen most of what this laptop can offer, meaning that it shines in DirectX 12 titles, which was to be expected. It's not that good with older DirectX 9 and 10 titles, and it may have certain performance issues that are not quite obvious in the sense of what you can do about them. So those performance dips. But we will see what is going to happen. I'm also going to test another theory with you, though I'm not entirely sure if this one is going to have the best result. Let's go to best performance and see if this is going to have any sort of impact on performance, because sometimes there may be issues where these things happen. Okay, waiting again for the same routine. Yeah, it's going to be the same annoyance. 500 frames per second. Nah, I think the performance is going to be roughly the same. So it may only surprise us in the case of 3D graphics if it's having better performance consistency, but I'm not entirely sure if this is going to be the case. There is also an icon you may have noticed on the screen. It's GLXS. It's another OpenGL graphics test. I will run that, but don't expect a performance that is going to be in any sort of way earth-shattering, and perhaps there are going to be more issues because the test is quite old. Again, it's used mostly as reference and not in a sense of modern application capabilities. In case you wonder, for the graphics card, I have chosen perhaps not the best performance settings, but ones that are quite consistent with most tests, so with a preference towards quality. Still, this shouldn't have resulted in those dips in the 3D tests and also the ones I have noticed on some 2D operations. So I'm expecting most of them to remain the same or perhaps performance to be slightly high. Let's see which case is the right one. So the big question is now, over 13 now, it was the same score. So I'm not expecting that much of an influence. In general, there is quite a debate. There are situations where changing the power profile may bring better performance, and there are situations where this is clearly not going to happen. It depends on laptops and how they are configured by the manufacturers, how the drivers are being made, and of course any sort of internal hardware configuration that is going to influence that. I'm seeing the same dips in performance from time to time, and I think they're going to be just as well experienced on the 3D tests. In this case, I think that it may be a problem related to drivers because I'm not entirely sure what happens over here. The performance seems to be slightly more consistent in this test, but it's the only case where I see a clear difference compared with the previous run. Now it runs in full screen, which I don't quite understand why this wasn't the case the previous time when I ran the test. And as you have noticed, nothing changed. It runs at a much better performance, and I think right now it's clear that there are no hiccups. So that's good to know. It's a solid 2009 frames per second. It hasn't dipped below that, and it hovered around 300. So DirectX 9 performance has clearly improved. Let's see DirectX 10. Yes, that is not quite good. I'm expecting it to be an issue because I have not restarted the computer before trying this test, but anyway. So let's see. Okay. Yes, and as it seems, I have my mouse stuck in a particular position, which is not nice at all. Good. Now at least it started. There are some issues, but I don't think they are that important. Okay, 140 frames per second. I think it runs more or less as it did before, perhaps with slightly less stuttering. Here the performance is entirely similar. It was around 800 even before. To me it seems roughly similar in here as well. Similar, perhaps slightly higher by a couple of frames per second, but I'm not entirely sure. And now we probably ended the set of tests that are for 2D and 3D, and right now they are the synthetic ones. So the 2D Mark 989, yes, I don't think it was any sort of meaningful difference compared with the previous one. The 3D performance was clearly high. I'm not expecting the memory performance to change drastically. I think it's roughly at the same value. There are a couple of benchmarks left, and they still take some time. I don't have that much to comment on performance. I was expecting clearly much better performance consistency, and I am surprised to notice that this is not the case, because ultimately the graphics chipset that is used on the dedicated the solution should have made better performance. However, the test can also be considered slightly older. It's already a couple of years older, but this goes on to show that there may be a lot of performance left on the table, and just as it always happens, optimization is the biggest issue. In terms of processor performance, probably I wouldn't have that much to say. I think it's quite alright. Although I have to say that nowadays there seems to be less and less applications that can make good use of a large number of cores, and still most of them do not scale that well in this circumstance. Okay, so I think that more or less the results were, let's see. All right, so I think that the results are slightly better than they were before on most accounts except on latency. This was probably expected because the power profile generally allows the processor to run faster, which may mean faster transfer rate towards the memory. All right, at 2D tests, yes, I still think that the performance was perhaps slightly improved, but not in any meaningful way. Yes, all right. I think, and let's see, for the free tests only. Okay, so as you notice over here, the DirectX 9 performance has tremendously increased compared with the previous test that was run only in the balanced power configuration. This was probably expected. I was hoping, however, for better performance also in the test, but this was not the case. And unfortunately, it failed at DirectX 10 and 11. I can safely assume that the performance would be higher. However, as noticed, there are those dips that bother me, and I don't know exactly what caused them. All right, I think I showed you enough with this benchmark. Let's go and see another one with the same configuration. I'm going to select all the tests. This test is quite old. I think it's more than 10 years old, so don't expect any sort of great performance, but we are going to do what we do best, and that is present some scenarios. Okay, so around the benchmark, I'm not expecting it to be able to run up to the end because I think there is an issue that occurs with newer versions of Windows, or there is something that is inherently problematic in the way in which the program addresses the function that calculates the end score. As you can see over here, there is clearly some sort of hard limit that is being hit. I do not know exactly why. It seems to hover around 100 frames per second. It could be limited by the vertical sync, but this is not entirely the case for other tests, so I don't know exactly what happens. Again, this test is not meaningful to us more than a decade ago. Right now, just about any good graphics card gets to over 200 frames per second. So in this case, having 500 is nothing surprising. You have noticed again a very interesting limitation. When it was in wireframe, it had almost 900 frames per second. When it's doing the shading, it's actually limited. Interestingly enough, I have not found anything that could point at a limit in the drivers. However, there clearly seems to be a limit that is being applied. Again, this is an OpenGL test. Today, most applications do not use OpenGL anymore, except some professional ones, and games have long switched to Vulkan or Direct3D or any other graphics interface that is popular. So OpenGL is not in the forefront anymore for quite a long time. That exploding logo was interesting in a sense that previous graphic cards that did not have enough power, of course, again, we are talking about graphic cards that were released more than 7 years ago, were not able to run the test that fast. However, with modern graphics card, this kind of load doesn't create any sort of issues. Quite good performance in this test, but again, we can see the same strange limitation. What I can say in most of these tests is that it's recommended that NVIDIA can actually show all of these applications running with minimal graphical glitches because they are quite old, which goes on to show that the graphics drivers themselves are clearly quite well developed, even though they do not cater for these demographics. Again, nothing surprising over here. These tests have been running in the hundreds of frames per second for many years. And I think that most tests are actually capped at 100 frames per second. So even if the graphics card could output more, probably the program is not going to be able to record more than 999 frames per second. Although this test may look complex, it's actually very simple. I think there are only two surfaces that are going to move slightly, so there is not much 3D graphics that is going to be rendered in those frames. Again, this was a test that showed some issues with older graphics card, but most of the ones that have been released in the last 7 years, including the integrated ones, fare very well in this respect. I have not mentioned much about the trackpad and how it feels. Okay, it crashed. And as you can see, there are no results. This was to be expected. It happens with most computers that are released in the last few years, and of course with Windows 11 the chances of running successfully the test are even slimmer than that. I was starting to mention something about the trackpad. I think the trackpad's field is quite nice, although I have to say that it's clearly not the best trackpad I noticed. It has a certain feel to it, but I don't think that gliding the finger or pressing the buttons is appealing in any way. So the only features that really stand out in terms of tactile feel is probably the keyboard. Alright, so as you can see, this was the performance. There is nothing else to add. I will also try to show you what is the result of a benchmark with the wireless card. We have a Wi-Fi 6. No, I don't want that. We have a Wi-Fi 6 wireless router, so it's going to show quite good performance, and I'm expecting both the upload and the download connection to be quite good. Of course, the upload may be slower than that because of limitations, but surprisingly, it's not the case. Yes, so a solid performance, around 500 megabits per second is clearly good on a gigabit connection, gigabit wireless connection, and on Wi-Fi 6 with the current abilities. So I think it ran quite well, low ping, very good consistency. I don't have anything to say about this wireless card. I think it performed perfectly. In case you wonder what is the current setup, the wireless router is placed around 2.5 meters, and it's behind the wall that is, of course, not very fixed, so there are not going to be that many issues with performance on such long range. However, I think it fares quite well. I think that this may be close to the end of the test. I have shown to you most of what I had in mind. So I think it's the time to think if I would give a recommendation or not for this laptop. I think for 1,600 euros laptop, it still is not up to the task in certain respects. And I'm not going to comment on the processor because I have not seen things that could be blamed about it. I have not seen many issues with the integrated graphics card. The drivers and the configuration clearly could have been better, and this is one of my concerns. The display, in some ways, it's annoying that there are still displays that are so mundane still being offered with laptops that cater at least to creative persons, because I think it's very bad. LCDs really have to disappear from this market, and OLED, micro LEDs, and other technologies to replace them, because there are so many cases where accuracy is lost, where pictures do not look as good as they can, and of course because we already have higher refresh rate OLED screen. They may be slightly more expensive, but the amount of quality you're going to extract, how much is going to be helpful to see images as they should, is going to be massive. So I still think that LCDs are a lousy excuse with the current technology we have. So this is my first and most important concern. The second one would be for features. As noticed, I do not see the reason why the manufacturer hasn't placed more emphasis on certain aspects, such as having an integrated Ethernet port, when there are many situations where, due to security or for other purposes, you still have this requirement, and something related to power supply. But the main one still remains on the drivers and the way in which every part operates in order to reach a particular level of performance, because as you have noticed, there are clearly situations where things do not turn out right. And my experience of using the graphics interface, although it doesn't seem to be, let's say, concerning in any way, I still think that there is some performance left on the table. And I don't think it's just an issue that is specific to a benchmark. And overall, I think that just about sums it up. So I don't know if I would recommend such a laptop on such a high price, unless you are not going to do graphics works, or you're not going to do extensive graphics works where you need an accurate color profile and other specifications. But clearly for the performance, I can say it's good, and probably if you're going to use also an external display, you will have probably nothing to complain about. Oh, I think this just about sums it up. Again, I will present the full specifications on the description of the video, so that you will have a better understanding of what you actually saw running over here. In case you wonder, the system has all the potential updates, both from Windows and from Dell or manufacturers of graphic cards, in this case NVIDIA and Intel. So I'm not expecting the performance to be any better than that at the current moment. Probably it may get better in the future, but I'm not having high expectations. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did so, please subscribe. And also, I would like to mention the fact that there will be different videos with different topics, so do not mind that much how the channel is evolving. Thank you very much for watching.